what are the key characteristics that make a good public speaker?
Oh, number one, if we're talking about just characteristics as them as a person, confidence. Confidence. To be confident, if you want to lead and you want people to listen to you, you need to act like somebody people would wanna listen to, right? And so that's gonna be non-verbally, you're gonna throw your shoulders back. I like to have my students roll them up, roll them back. You want a really broad structure. You want to be engaging, giving eye contact. There's this rule of try to give eye contact to everybody in the room once or twice if you can, and don't be afraid of it. Also, don't be weird about it. If you're looking at someone more than 2 seconds, they might feel like it's a little too intimate and selectively sort of distance themselves emotionally from what you're saying. If it comes to research, fun fact, we like tall, clean-shaven, full head of hair men. Research shows that men are more persuaded by men and women are still more persuaded by men. Now, when it comes to women, hair is even more important. You'll notice a lot of politicians as they get older that are women will cut their hair shorter because they don't want to show signs of hair loss or hair brittleness. And anyone else who has lost hair, I've gone through seasons of that. I have lupus, and so I've had pretty severe hair fallout. I cut my hair shorter, I lighten it, I try to find a way to make it look less thin and brittle. But women, there's a difference also between brunettes and blondes. There's a very famous study of door to door saleswomen where the same saleswomen would just wear a brunette or a blonde wig. And what they found is although brunettes appear and are seen as more credible, blondes sell more. So it can be very advantageous to be blonde if you're a woman. And so we do have these physical characteristics we look to. Again, even the clean shaven thing still stands, although having facial hair is seen as more masculine. So depending on your audience, you can adjust some of these characteristics. We have static and dynamic characteristics about us. Static characteristics are things we cannot change or change easily. That's going to be like height. Although you will see a lot of politicians wearing those nice platform shoes or standing on a box, and that's because they want to be seen as more credible. So they take something static and turn it into something a bit dynamic, which is a characteristic we can change. We can adjust our tone and our pitch and our voice. We have a lot of say in our voice, actually, depending on the mood we want to create. And so you want to play around with these dynamic characteristics to really help cultivate the persona that you want people to see you as in whatever public speaking or sales environment that you're in.
You pretty much answered my second question, which was, are these traits born? Are you born with these traits, or are they natural? Can you learn them over time? And it sounds like some of these you really can kind of present yourself in a way that is more appealing. Some of them aren't, like hair loss. I mean, obviously, you're
We
kind
got wigs, we got toupees.
of, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, remember that communication is a skill, right? It can be taught, it can be learned, it can be learned badly. In fact, we might be in this, stage where we call a lot of people narcissists, right? We're talking about like personality characteristics and our perception of that ethos. I actually have a theory that sometimes it comes down to skill level, that somebody who might be perceived as fully into themselves and not really caring about other people, might be more aggressive in their communication, just may have grown up in a household where aggression was shown very readily and other things weren't. But maybe it's not that they are just like this narcissistic, all about them person, but they genuinely lack skills to communicate and through that frustration act out. So we need to remember that like communication itself is a skill. You are not stuck ever in the skill set that you're in. There's always more to learn and different things to practice and improve on.
When you're talking about practicing and improving, is it just
Mhm.
purely getting yourself out there, kind of trial through error until you really hone your skill?
That's a big part of it. I mean, that's public speaking 101. I would find if there's a Toastmasters near you, there are also online communities, but get out there and genuinely practice. If you are too scared to go to a Toastmasters meeting and trial and error your speech, then that's probably a great sign you're not ready for whatever your TED Talk goal is or whatever it is that you wanna do. It takes a lot of embarrassment. It takes a lot of screwing up in order to get really good. But hey, every time you screw up makes for a better story, and storytelling is pretty much one of the biggest foundational pieces of speaking. And so go out and get those stories. Sort of like a stand-up comedian. They put themselves in embarrassing situations so that it can help them out in their set. It's the same mindset. So it's just doing it scared until it's not scary anymore.
So you've really given quite a few good tips here on how to improve. But if someone came to you today and asked, what are the 3 things I need to practice right now? What would they be?
Well, I like that you said practice, first of all. Number 1 would be settling your nerves. That is also a skill in public speaking. It is okay that your heart starts beating fast, you might get a little sweaty, but learning breath work, knowing how to calm your body down so that you can speak clearly is number 1. And that's the practice before the practice, right? And those are things that'll help you throughout all the different areas of your life. So get good at calming yourself down. Number 2, your posture. It's huge. Really throw your shoulders back and look at your audience. If you have to stand in one place, that's okay. Use your hands to, illustrate or like really enhance what you're talking about. If you can move around, get used to using the fullness of the stage. Make your audience follow you. You, even if you're using a PowerPoint, you should be the most interesting thing up there. So be interesting, non-verbally. And number 3, warm up your voice beforehand. This is High School Musical 101, the do that. You can even take a pen, throw it to the back of your mouth as much as you can your jaw and hold it there for 1 minute. Loosen your tongue up, loosen your mouth up so you don't get tripped over your words so easily. It may not even be nerve related. You might just literally have not stretched the instrument that you're using for this activity.
Incredible. I'll be using those tips as well. Um, so you mentioned something here, and I want to touch on this before going forward, which is nonverbal communication, because I've always heard that nonverbal communication actually trumps some of the verbal communication. So is that true?
Depending on the textbook and the author that you're reading, it is between 10 to 60% of communication all the time at any given time, depending on what kind of channel or medium you are using for communication. So, for example, if you're texting, and we could argue that it's 0, right? But if it is face to face in person, which is the richest type of media, meaning the communication channel with the most cues, it is going to be even up to 90% of communication because we also, in our subconscious, right, we hold automatic body movements that we consciously aren't aware of. And so if we're speaking to someone and we are not aware of all of our movements, we could be coming off disingenuous. If we have kind of shifty eyes out of nerve, someone else could read that as being untrustworthy. And so we really want to understand and know what we do when we speak. And recording yourself in conversations is a great way to find out.
So what kind of soft skills do people need aside from the communication skills in order to improve on networking?
Oh, that's gonna be a lot of that nonverbal, especially your facial expressions, right? That's gonna be eye contact, that's gonna be smiling. You want to appear to be pleasant, confident, and interested. So you're gonna be using these soft skills of listening as well. And we wanna do what's called active listening, which is then we're leaning in a little bit and we're using these nonverbal encouragers like, oh, mm-hmm. Ah, right? Things that encourage someone else to talk. Now, when you're networking, your goal should be to talk less and listen more because people will refer to you or be more likely to hire you if they like you. And in order to get someone to like you and build their trust, it is to be a trustworthy, likable person. If you think about networking as making new friends, that might be a good place for you to just kind of have a foundation in because people like people that they like. People like people that are interested in them, and you can show that through nonverbal or nonverbal actions through that active listening. Also, fun psychology trick of using their name several times, which gives this appearance that you're closer than you actually are. But really, we want to be likable. We want to seem engaged and interested because people can feel loved by all sorts of people. But what's really powerful is feeling interesting. And we love people who are interested in us.
Along those lines, there, I saw research from Harvard University saying that 85% of career success comes from having well developed soft skills and people skills. So, I mean, have you heard that? Is that true?
Yeah, and still to this day, about 70% of jobs are gotten through networking. So not even just necessarily you directly networking with somebody, but some you networking with them and them knowing someone else who needs a position filled and through those networks still getting that job. And so that blind like as we're talking about jobs that are, pretty decent salary, those soft skills are still the primary way people are earning those positions through networking, through who someone knows that trusts you, right, and gets them hooked up in that position.
Has the pandemic and post pandemic really changed communication? Because I have worked in a lot of remote jobs since the pandemic. I personally think that it's impacted how I communicate. So, when it comes to networking and communicating post pandemic, have we seen a shift there?
Absolutely. A lot of Zoom, Google Meet, online people still use Skype, right? Networking, where we are networking on a screen, where we used to go to coffee shops, go into people's offices. That's become more rare. It is coming back. But when we are communicating on a screen like you and I are, it's a richer form of communication than, let's say, texting or email. We do have some nonverbals, but we don't have all of them. I can't see all of your body movements, and even our pitches, the highest and lowest pitches are cut off in video and call, communication. And it's harder to observe and read micro expressions, which are these tiny little face movements we will make just for like sometimes less than a second that we can read when we're in front of someone, which can tell us a lot about whether to trust or not trust what they're saying. And those are much harder to read in video calls.
Oh, I wanted to get more into the future of communication at a different point, but you brought up something that really relates here, which is I think it's the Apple headgear that they have. Maybe it's the no, it's the Facebook one that presents yourself as a fully digital version of yourself. It's not just presenting like on on the goggles a fake you or fake eyes. I saw a podcast with Mark Zuckerberg and I'm forgetting who the other person was, where they had the podcast fully digitalized, and their digital version of themselves was talking to the other person. So, have you seen that at all?
I have not. So this is news to me. That genuinely sounds fascinating.
Okay, hold on, hold on. I do want to get your reaction to this. Hold on one second.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the studies that most of communication, even when people are speaking, is not actually the words that they're saying, right? It's kind of the expression and all that. So, and we try to capture that with the kind of classical um, expressive avatar system that we have. That's the kind of more
Wow.
cartoon designed one. You
That is fascinating. In the therapy world, when the metaverse was really first announced, we'd have conversations. When I say we, I mean me and some other therapists, but it was conversations being had about, okay, one day we're going to be providing psychotherapy in the metaverse. And what are our offices going to look like? Right? Like, what is that going to open up and what is that going to be? Will it be as effective? Will not? And that's incredible.
Yeah, this is just the first version. From what I understand, it actually takes a while for them to get a fully 3D digitized version of themselves to be put into the metaverse. But going forward, we don't know how easy this is going to be. It could be really easy just to digitize yourself and then you have a digital version going forward. But yeah, so I saw this as a different form of communication for the future, and it seems pretty legit.
It is terrifying, but very legit. It's like right now, right? It looks like the strange familiar, that concept in horror when something's human-like, but something's off, and it's kind of more eerie because it's not quite human. It reminds me of like the Polar Express or something. But yeah, I am interested in where this goes because this will open up a whole new field of scholarship in the communication world.
Term is uncanny valley. Um,
Yeah, that's another term. Yeah.
Yeah, and it truly, I mean, this is as far as I can tell, this is as close as they've gotten to getting the real thing, because there have been a lot of avatar versions of yourself that just look off, and it doesn't feel authentic when you're talking to someone.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
anyway, so yeah, I thought that it would be kind of cool to see get your opinion on that. So
Yeah, thank you for showing me. I mean, I genuinely think it's fascinating. It's going to be really interesting in the future how this technology is going to help with the epidemic of loneliness, but also maybe further enhance it. There's so many implications that this can have. And right now it's all speculative. So we're in a really interesting time in history. Like, we're all here for this and getting to witness these technological advances.
yeah, I'm interested to see what's going to happen when you combine this technology with maybe even AI smart enough to communicate with you, and then it really opens up possibilities.
Oh, yeah, even in the therapy world. I mean, there will be a generation, maybe not alpha, maybe the one after, that might prefer a non-human therapist to a human.
Yeah, 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 it blows my mind a bit.
Yeah. We'll have a humans right work movement in the future, right? It's like something like that.
Yeah, people will be put out of work for this.
Oh my gosh.
So right now we've talked a lot about the external communication, and let's bring it back into like inner voice or inner dialogue. So, how much does our inner voice actually impact us?
A ton. So much. A lot. However you wanna phrase it, it impacts us greatly. How we communicate to ourselves, right? We have interpersonal communication, which is communication between people. Intrapersonal communication is the communication tune within ourselves. And often, like, how we think, right, and what we think becomes action. Not always. Research has shown that attitude and behavior are not always correlated, but certainly, our biggest limits that we have is how we think and feel about ourselves and our own capabilities.
Um, so I know that a lot of people go through courses or do things, read books to improve their inner voice. So, do you have any tips for people that want to improve their inner voice?
Oh, yeah, there's so many different interventions, but one of my favorite is an EER, which stands for externalize, evaluate, replace. And so let's say we are giving a speech and it goes very badly. And we mess up the end, we start tripping over our words, we start just getting more and more nervous and maybe even bail, right? What might be considered one of the worst case scenarios. And then we have a thought in our head, which is, I suck at this. I'm the worst. I'm horrible at public speaking. Those aren't very helpful thoughts. We call them automatic negative thoughts, or ants for short, because they kind of infest our mind. We want to think about these ants almost like radio waves, right? They've been here forever. And in recent history, we figured out really what radio waves are and how to use them. These automatic negative thoughts are kind of similar, and it can be attached to all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, minimizing, what we call mind reading, which is assuming what someone else is thinking, and it's usually negative. Self labeling, like I'm an idiot, I'm stupid. We also have what are also sometimes referred to as these OCD esque automatic thoughts. These are the scary ones. Like, you're driving down a highway, right? And it's been 30 minutes, and all of a sudden you're like, if I turn this wheel, it'll all be over. You're like, oh my gosh. Or you're standing on a tall ledge. You're like, if I jumped, like like you're like, oh my gosh. Or someone's cooking with a knife. You're like, what if they stab me? What if I stab them? Right? These kind of like scarier ones, which are really just your amygdala testing your prefrontal cortex. And if we become afraid of these thoughts and think that they're true, we can develop OCD. But for these smaller ants, that delusional thinking of the all or nothings, we want to first recognize that we are experiencing one of them. And we should know pretty quickly because it's going to feel pretty bad. You might get that ping in your chest or maybe some heat, your posture goes down. Like, again, they're just kind of been floating around and it comes into your mind, right? You didn't really want it, it just happens to you. So the first step is to externalize. We want to externalize the thoughts. That might sound like my brain is having a thought that I suck at this, or my prefrontal cortex is having a thought that I suck at this. Whatever language makes sense for you, but we don't want to take this on as our thought. I mean, we have 60,000 thoughts a day, and the idea that we control all of them is is pretty narcissistic, right? Of course we don't. We have control over our responses, but thoughts come in and out of here all the time. You get a song stuck in your head and you just can't get it out. Like you didn't choose that. And so we externalize. Next, we evaluate. And we might want to use logic, right? So let's look at this whole speech, really only unravel towards the end. Okay, where did it start to unravel? When I was talking about this point. But before that, I had good eye contact. My transitions were strong. I used signposts. All of the basics of good public speaking. My story was legit. I used strong, statements, and then it fell apart. Okay, so through evaluation, I recognized that the whole speech wasn't bad. Maybe I don't suck at all of it, but I really need to work on my conclusions. So then we go to the replace. And this is the most important part because people might naturally evaluate, like they start working on their mental health. They're like, okay, I'm going to challenge these thoughts, but they maybe didn't externalize it, right? They still feel like it's them doing this to themselves and they don't replace it. The replacement is the most important part because this is what builds a new neural pathway. Neural pathways are like internal cycles or circuits that we get stuck on. We might also refer to them as habits. And I like to think about neural pathways as being made of like all these, I don't know, guitar strings, right? And each string that you have makes that habit or that internal habit more and more sturdy and strong. So your brain's going to keep taking it. And so what we want to do is try to disassemble that string by string so it gets weaker and weaker. And as we do, we create a new neural pathway through this EER. It's a good way to do it. And so when we replace that thought, we start building that new bridge. And if we do it more and more and more, our brain will say, hey, this path is actually stronger than the old negative path. I'm going to start taking this more naturally. So if you've ever changed a habit, you've probably felt this process pretty clearly when it starts to become easier to do the thing that's good for you. And so when we replace this thought, we want to find something that's true from that evaluation. So think about if your automatic negative thought had to do with appearance and you're like, I'm the ugliest person in the world. If you tried to replace it with, I'm the best looking person on the planet, your brain's going to know that you're tricking it. It's going to feel icky about it, or it's at least going to feel tricked, even though we're not actually tricking. So if we go with the extreme opposite, if we say, I'm a fantastic public speaker, I'm the best, we're going to reject that thought. It doesn't feel real, and we don't need to do that to ourselves. So we're going to go from the evaluation, and we might say, like, oh, I'm improving my conclusions in public speaking. Or like, this is an opportunity to get better. Like, I am solid at the front end and I just get tripped up when I'm trying to close, right? It's finding something real and stating it to ourselves. So again, I am improving the conclusions of my speech. And we let that be the new conclusion, and if with each automatic negative thought, right, whether it's catastrophizing, minimizing, mind reading, all or nothing thinking, we wanna do that same process as much as we can until we start hearing that replacement thought is our new thought. That's our new habit of how we respond to similar stimuli, and it takes about anywhere from some will say 5 days to 15 days of a repeated, like, conscious behavior to start changing a habit, and let's say 2 weeks, right around that 15-day mark. So if you think about it, it's not that long term of effort in order to change your relationship with the stimuli. So use that EER. That's a good place to start.
Are you saying that every morning when I'm reviewing that memory of public speaking and I'm trying to change up my a particular moment of that, so I'm trying to improve the ending, do I need to go through multiple public speaking events and assess each one of those events, or can I change my habit in 5 to 15 days from one event and just keep on replaying it in my head and try to improve based off of that one event?
And so exposure therapy rules would say yes, that you need to have a similar stimuli repeatedly in order for your brain to reduce its fear response around it. And so if we're just talking about the internal dialogue, EER is a great way to deal with those internal thoughts around a similar stimuli. And in some cases, depending on what we're talking about, you might experience that stimuli often, such as if networking is a part of your job. You don't really have to try to manufacture that experience. You will get the opportunity to work on your internal relationship with that experience very steadily. With public speaking, you might want to challenge yourself. There's an intervention in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where for 7 days straight, you manufacture or force yourself into a similar situation. So if you're really, really afraid of small talk, right? For 7 days straight, you go out to grocery stores and restaurant, and you have small talk with servers and with cashiers to show your brain how safe it is. So with public speaking, you can absolutely do something similar where with Toastmasters, with even online like interaction with your friends, with your family, practice these public speaking skills, whatever speech you're working on or lecture, presentation, and continuously showing your brain that the worst case scenario isn't happening, right? Because really the worst case scenario when we get down to it is we're afraid of rejection, right? We're afraid that we will speak so badly that people will reject us as a person, right? We'll be so embarrassed. And research supports this. There's a very famous study in the early 2000s called the Cyberball study. And what they did is they got participants and they put them at a computer and they hooked up and measured all their physiology, right? And they had them play a game called Cyberball. And so in that game, two other players represented by, little like uh, like video game characters would be on screen, and you'd essentially play catch with them. You'd click a button and go to one person, click a button, go to another. And so, they played, got in good rhythm. Sometimes it would switch up. And then something that inevitably happened is the other two would play without the participant. And so they measured what was going on in their body, and what the participant didn't know is that those other two people didn't exist. They were just a computer program, but just the perception of rejection lit up the same parts in the body as physical pain. Because anthropologically, in hunter gatherer days, if we were rejected by a group, we died. And so that fear still exists in us today, which is why public speaking itself is considered the biggest phobia in the world. And in fact, if it gets to a clinical level, it actually is a mental illness. It's called social anxiety performance based. But yeah, this stuff is very real for people. It's scary.
Gets to the level, is it medication? How do you solve it when it gets to clinically diagnosed?
Well, it depends on the individual if they like the medical model. So there are medications like benzodiazepines that can help with that panic response, but also cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy. The medical and therapeutic model can be complementary to each other as well. And so, depending on the individual, they do have options. Again, these are skills. Nobody is stuck in this forever if they don't want to be.
When it comes to other communications, future communications, where do you see um, human communication going now that we've talked about, um, you know, digital versions of ourselves online, AI? Where do you see us in 20, 50 years communicating?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, a lot of our communication will be virtual, but I imagine there will be some sort of movement. Maybe it's underground, maybe it's widespread of people wanting to connect with people. I foresee a future where people crave that, just as they do now. And so I don't think that that part of us is ever going to go away, where people will seek out, and there will be a lot of businesses, and I'm sure a lot of money to be made to help humans connecting with other humans. When we see it now with dating apps, right? And even like friendship apps like Bumble, BFF. And so I think those things are going to be here forever. And I'm glad that they are because we deserve to connect with other people. Yeah, we're gonna have a lot more artificial communication, maybe some more polite communication, thanks to things like ChatGPT and whatever that becomes, where people can write an email and say, make this less sassy or less aggressive. But that does risk that artificial component where, again, I think that's going to be the uncanny valley of communication, right? And so we're headed for a mixed bag, but that's sort of what our future's always been. I mean, once the radio came out and newspapers came out, it's there's always going to be fear around these new technologies, and some of it's just really valid, and some of it ends up not happening. And so, time will tell.
Good, good, good. Yeah. Well, Dr. Corey Peterson, I really appreciate the time. Honestly, this has been enlightening. I love the conversation here. And thank you for great communication.
Well, thank you very much for having me.